All right. So, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our youth media production for beginners webinar. We're happy that you are here with us this morning. This session is clearly being recorded and it will be made available afterward on the Wisconsin After School Network YouTube channel. I'm going to hand it over to Nick, who is with us this morning to talk to us about youth media production. So, thanks for joining us, Nick.
Hi. So I'm Nick Ostrom. I work for PBS Wisconsin. I'm going to share my screen really quick, uh, and then get everything ready. All right. So I call this empowering youth voice through media production, very much for beginners. So this is not going to be tech heavy. This is more about ways of engaging students, a few principles to keep in mind, no matter what your media project is. Uh, so a little background, I work for PBS Wisconsin. So if you've ever watched PBS, if you've ever watched Sesame Street or the NewsHour or, your favorite Ken Burns documentary, that's PBS. PBS is really just a network of local stations around the country. And I happen to work in the one in Wisconsin, which covers the entire state of Wisconsin. We're based out of Madison. So we air all those national programs as well as our own stuff that we create. And I work in the education department of PBS Wisconsin. So we create classroom media, which is meant for schools all over Wisconsin, based all about Wisconsin, basically, Wisconsin history, science, English, all these different things. We also do professional development, and that's kind of my role. So I do professional development surrounding media literacy. So I help educators kind of find ways to engage students in evaluating the information they encounter online or analyzing media that they watch. And then the other part of my job is media creation with young people. So I do a project where I go into schools and I work with a classroom to create their own documentaries. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today comes from that experience of working with teachers and high school students to create their own video projects. So this is kind of how I'm structuring things today. Uh, Roughly chronological order that you would encounter in a production. So starting with pre-production and all the planning that goes into it. I'm going to talk about interviews. Now, you don't necessarily have to do interviews in a video project, but it's one of the most accessible things to do for beginners. So I recommend it, and I'll talk about that. A little bit about lighting and audio. Again, not too tech heavy, just a couple things to keep in mind. Uh, I'm going to talk about B-roll. I'll talk about A-roll too, and what the difference is. And then just a little bit about editing. Video editing is its own world, so I'll just touch on that briefly. So, why do youth media production? Um, I think you're probably watching this because you might have some interest in it. You might have a project in mind. Um, but really, it's a great way to empower youth voice. So it allows young people to kind of take control and voice maybe it's their opinions, maybe it's not an opinion piece. That's fine, but they're still using their creativity, um, kind of embracing their identity in different ways, and getting comfortable projecting those things. Skill development. There are a lot of skills that go into this. You of course have, those very specific technical skills, like are they learning video editing? Are they learning videography? All those kind of hard skills. But there's tons and tons of other skills out there. In fact, I'll show you an overwhelming list in 1 second. But also engagement. It's very engaging. This is just a fun thing to do. Students get into it. Even the ones who don't seem into it, when it's over, they'll be glad they did it. It's just inherently hands-on, and I would say it's inherently fun. So, just an example of the skills involved in this. Now, I hope this doesn't make it seem like you need to learn a million skills in order to do this because you don't. Uh, but these are some of the things young people practice while they're doing this. Now, initially put this together uh, as part of our media literacy certification program. So this was intended for K-12 educators who are always thinking about, how does this match my curriculum? How does this meet the state standards in my classroom? Now I know for all of you, it's a little different, but still something to keep in mind. It's not just using a camera. It's writing, it's storytelling, there's research, there's media analysis, there's collaboration. This is a very collaborative topic. Feedback, critical thinking, any number of things. Um, I like this quote from a teacher. This is from, it's one of those things. A teacher put it on Twitter, and then our partner station, KQED, put it in a presentation, and then I copied it from them. But it's great, great quote. You can get students to write the longest, most detailed essay of their lives if you disguise it as a script or a video or a podcast. And that is totally true. I've worked with students on script writing, and it's hard. If they've never done it before, it's hard to sit down and write a script. But it's not that different from writing an essay. There are some, big differences. But ultimately, you're getting this information, you're writing it down, you're putting it in a compelling way, you're structuring it in the right way. You have to edit it down, and that's a big difference. Instead of students trying to pad it out to get to that page minimum or whatever, they're editing it down. It's like, hey, if you're doing a short video, you only want it to be 5 minutes. That's only a couple pages of voiceover or interview clips or whatever it is. So you really have to cut it down. And that's the hard part, is taking things out. Um, and video is just inherently engaging, also not for the people who create it, but for the people who watch it. Of course, audio has its advantages, video has different advantages. But for example, if you wanted to, talk to people about all the great work you're doing, video is a great way of doing that. And that's one of the reasons I want to talk about interviews, because if you can get kind of a testimonial on camera, uh, you can include that in it, and then you have a voiceover. Um, created or co-created with young people. It's really, really engaging, and kind of for a general audience, they love to see things created by young people. Uh, okay, so this is kind of the standard way that media projects are structured. So you start out with pre-production, that's all your planning, your research. You're finding your sources, whether that's an interview subject or whether it's a book, whatever your topic is. You're putting all that together. You're putting shot lists. I'll talk more in detail about this in a minute. And then you move into your actual production. So that's filming or recording, whatever it is. Post-production, that's when you're editing, you're revising, you're getting feedback, you're making changes, and then publishing. So however you decide to share it. This is a structure that pretty much all media projects have, whether you're creating a 5-minute video as a class project or you're making a Hollywood movie, they all follow this structure. It gets more complex or more simple or short or long. You could do all these steps in one day. You could have, like if you want students to practice, you could spend an hour where you say, hey, you know what, pick up a phone, do a selfie mode and introduce yourself. That's a media project. You could still follow this structure. Pre-production would be like making a few notes, not even a script, just bullet points. And then production is when you hit record. Post-production, even if you're not editing it, you're watching it, and then you're thinking, okay, I need to do that again, or I need to do it differently, or you're getting feedback from someone else. And then publishing it is you show it to somebody. You can do all of this in 1 hour, or this could take a year if you're doing a massive, big budget production. Like it's as long or short as you want, but whatever you're doing, I would suggest following this structure in some way because it'll really, really help you. So let's talk about pre-production. Um, Pre-production is often either overlooked or skipped over because everybody wants to hit record because that's the fun part. Or they view it as the fun part. And I think a lot of students, young people, um, they want to pick up a camera and do it, and depending on what they watch, if they're watching social media, they're watching TikTok, YouTube, the people who do that, And the people who do it well, they make it look easy. They make it look like they picked up their phone and hit record and made a great video, but guaranteed they spend a lot of time planning in pre-production. Uh, so that's a really important point to make. And really, whether you focus on pre-production or not can be the difference between a good project and a not so good project. So really plan things out as much as you can in advance, and make it fun. So one way to do this is a pitch sheet, and this comes from kind of the news world. This is actually from Student Reporting Labs, which is a program that falls under the umbrella of PBS NewsHour. They have a program where middle and high school students become journalists and do their own news reports in their classrooms, sponsored by their teachers. And they are really big on their pitch sheet. And that basically that is, it's like in a newsroom where a journalist will pitch a story to their editor, and then their editor will ask questions and either approve it or not approve it. Uh, and you can do this in more of a competitive, like Shark Tank style, pitch and we'll pick a story. Or it's just a good way to get them to think through what they're doing. You shouldn't even start filming something or even start your pre-production until you have an idea of what you're doing. What's the story you want to tell? Make an elevator pitch, that kind of thing. Really distill it down so you don't end up with kind of a meandering story that's all over the place. Um, you can ask, what's your hook? What are you going to do in the first 5 seconds to get people's attention? Is that stating your thesis? Is it an interesting anecdote that's going to get people's attention and draw them in? What's your structure? Beginning, middle, end. What's your beginning, middle, end? Are you gonna have a call to action at the end? Are you gonna wrap up, summarize at the end? What's the conflict? Is there any kind of conflict there? Or what's your ultimate goal? Is your goal to show people how cool something is that you're doing? Write that up in just a couple sentences. Um, yeah, I already talked about that. Okay, production. So after you have all your pre-production, everything's planned, you actually start recording. Um, Now, this isn't to say that you can't do any of this earlier. I know a lot of people who do this will give students sort of a mini project, like the example I gave of introducing themselves just on their phone. You could do that as part of your pre-production as practice. And that can kind of scratch that itch of wanting to hit record before doing any planning. You could just do a mini version of that. Um, and I'll give a couple more examples in a minute. Um, but one of the biggest things you're doing if you are not using professional cameras, if you're using your phone, which is totally fine, you can do great stuff on a phone. And in fact, I recommend it. Uh, oh, which way are you going to hold it? Sounds like a little thing, but this is controversial. Um, it's for a long time, my coworkers and I, like the producers who do this thing professionally, like really look down on vertical video because it's like, people like horizontal because it's cinematic, like that's what movies do, versus vertical is more casual, like social media style. But really there are pros and cons to each one. The deciding factor is how you're going to share it. So are you creating something that's meant to be shared on social media? Are you creating a short video that people are going to see on Instagram, or anywhere on their phone, film it vertical? Um, or are you going to show something that's going to be shown on a screen or a monitor or on a projected, auditorium? Then you should do it horizontal. So just think about your distribution. Remember that last step in the process is distribution. How are you going to share it? Are people primarily going to watch it on their phone or on a larger screen? Larger screen, go horizontal. Small screen, go vertical. Um, so once you're filming with your phone, the best thing you can do to get high quality video is stabilize it. Too often people hold it in their hands, and sometimes that's a distinct look. It's fine. If you're doing that casual introduction on your phone, selfie style, it's always going to be shaky. Like that's part of the thing that people do that. But if you really want it to look good, stabilize it somehow. So even just a few bucks to hold it. On the right, they used a paper cup and cut a slot in it and just slid the phone right in there. Whatever you're doing, keep it steady. It makes all the difference in the world. If you have to move the camera around while you're filming, this is how you should hold it. Hold it sideways in your hand. I can show you. I do have a phone here. So if you're holding it sideways, hold it like this, and then put your elbow in your hip, uh, and then use your other hand to hold your elbow. And then when you move your phone around, you kind of pivot your hips side to side. It's easier to show this in person, but you get the idea. It'll create a smooth movement. No matter how steady you think your hands are, it's going to move a little bit and people are going to notice it. So hold it like that. It looks kind of goofy, but it'll be steady. You can get kind of smooth movements if you're panning across something. I'm going to talk about B-roll in a few minutes. And this is one of the important things to do is to keep it steady. So don't let it get shaky. I'm not going to go too much into settings. There's, too many variables depending on what phone you have. Um, but, phones are, especially newer phones, are really good with automatic settings. But if you want to play with it, you can change the exposure, the brightness, um, depending on how much into the settings you want to get. But you can just keep it on automatic. It usually works pretty well. Um, Keep in mind the rule of thirds. If you've ever done photography, you've heard of this. Basically, you imagine the frame with two horizontal lines, two vertical lines cut into a grid. Wherever you want the audience's eye, the viewer's eye to go should be at the intersection of one of those grids. So you can see in this picture here, you got Benedict Cumberbatch. You want your eyes to go to his face. It's in that intersection right there. This is a general rule. It's good to follow it. People break this rule, like any rule. In the creative world, it gets broken all the time. But generally, it's a good idea to follow it. Another rule to keep in mind is the 180-degree rule. So if two people are facing each other, imagine a line going through them, like in this diagram. Keep the camera on one side of that line. Because if you film from one side and then you walk all the way around and do a circle around them, it's going to look confusing. The viewer will lose track of who is what. It'll look like they swapped sides. It looks really confusing. Um, so stay on one axis, stay on one side. It'll make things more it creates a spatial relationship that doesn't get confusing to the viewer, especially if you're doing editing and cutting things. It can get really confusing. Let's talk about lighting. Lighting is really, really important. Um, Almost important as audio. So use natural light when you can. So if you're in a building and you have fluorescent lights, if you're in a basement like I am right now, the lighting is awful. It just does not work. Try to get natural light, whether it's outside or near a window. Try to get near a window if you're filming a person, have them face the window where you get that weird effect where it's a shadow if the window is behind them. Um, Basically, you want the light source to be behind the photographer, the person filming, over their shoulder. So the light is onto the person being filmed or the object being filmed, whatever it is. You can create a reflector like this if you want to. It's often not necessary, but if you have the sun on one side of someone's face, you just get your piece of cardboard with aluminum foil over it. It can reflect the light to the other side of their face, so it can be more consistent. And if you have a bunch of people working on this, it's another job for someone to do. Like here, hold this. Keeps them busy. Okay, I'm gonna show this short clip here about sound, kind of to make the point and really demonstrate exactly why sound is so important.
All right, let's play a little bit of a game here. Imagine you're shooting a film or video and you have a choice to make between really good video quality and really good audio quality. Which do you choose? You'd be surprised how many people actually choose really good video and how this could probably be to their detriment. And we're going to show you two examples. First, really good audio, but really terrible video. So you can see with really terrible video how you can follow what I'm saying, how you can get into the story, despite the fact that the image has been degraded. Directors will use this creatively, like the Blair Witch Project, which is like an hour and a half of really terrible video, but the audio is so good you can follow the story. Things change drastically when we switch that around.
Suddenly, with really bad audio, it's hard to take what I'm doing seriously. It's hard to take this whole video seriously. And to get through something like this that's even 5 minutes is painful. This might work maybe with action cams if the content is really good, like a skydiver. We kind of forgive that for a second. But for an actual film content, you can't pull this off. It's terrible and it's unwatchable. And it's only unwatchable because the audio is terrible. So I'm going to switch things back for the benefit of all of us.
You can see how having good video and good audio is so super important. But if you had to choose, you shouldn't have to choose, but if you had to, maybe good audio is what you should be choosing.
Yeah, so that shows pretty clearly if you can only choose one, audio is more important. And that sometimes seems counterintuitive. If you're doing a video project, it's a visual medium, but audio is more important. So let me go to the next slide. So one way to improve your audio is to make your own sound booth. And this is really easy. All you need is a couple blankets and a way to hang them up, some chairs, make your own sound booth. We call them blanket forts when we make them. You could also do it in a closet. We saw this in the pandemic when a lot of radio professionals recorded from their own closets. And if you have clothes hanging in front of you, that's enough to dampen the sound and you can get really good audio. When we bring people to our studio to do to learn media production, we have them record in a fort like this, and we send them to our professional sound booth, and then we have them do an record in just a big hallway. The hallway sounds awful. It's big, echoey. It's a really terrible building, but the homemade DIY sound booth sounds just as good as the professional sound booth. So just find a way to dampen that sound. Even if you're just recording on a phone, phones generally have pretty bad microphones. But if you have it close enough, you can usually go into your settings and make sure it's the highest quality audio. If you can get lossless audio, that's really good. Hold it pretty close, but not too close to your mouth. And then surround yourself with some blankets or some clothes or some kind of cloth, and you'll get really, really good sound. And then that's useful if you're doing a video, so that's useful for doing your voiceover narration. If you're doing an interview, it's a little different, depending on how close you want to get to your interview subject. But try to, keep things, you don't want to be in like a brick room with nothing in it because it's going to echo. So anything you can do to dampen that sound. And I'm not, going to talk a lot about equipment, but if there's one thing you want to buy, if you're doing interviews, if you can only buy one thing, I would suggest a microphone, lavalier microphone that you can connect to your phone. Just check compatibility with the type of phone, plug it right in, hook it up to the lapel of the person you're interviewing, and it'll make a huge difference. And it's not that expensive, actually. One new thing, all this AI stuff is great with this stuff. So Adobe has this great feature where you can upload an audio track. You can give them a really, really terrible audio track and they will make it perfect. It's Adobe Audio Enhancer. It's free. I think they do make you make an account, but you can do a free account. It's just audio tracks with the free account. They can do it with video, but you need to have an Adobe subscription to do that. But if you can do a little editing software, you can pull the audio track out and just upload it here. I did this with some producers I work with. These are people who do video for a living. They were playing with this video, trying to get the audio. They recorded it outdoors, like in a forest, and there was all kinds of sound and wind. And they were tweaking it, spending all this time trying to get it perfect, and they just couldn't get it. It was really bad. They put it in here, 2 minutes later, they had the most perfect, pristine audio track you can imagine. They could not believe it. They were blown away by it. Um, and you can do this for free. Um, so that's audio. Um, let's talk about the actual content. So, um, I'm going to talk about A-roll and B-roll. So you might have heard of B-roll. You've definitely seen it. If you ever watch the local news, um, they're always going out and getting B-roll, where they have like a 5-second clip of, a street or something, and then they show the same 5-second clip over and over again as they're talking over it. That's B-roll. Um, and then A-roll is the main content, what you're talking about. So if you're doing something that's interview based, the interview itself is A-roll, and then you fill it in with B-roll. Um, and B-roll is real, it's not just filler. It's really, really helpful for a lot of reasons. So it's good skill building for the students who can get creative in filming it, and they can follow principles of composition and getting, making it look good. And it's much, much more interesting for the viewer. So for example, if you were doing a video about your programs and all the cool programs you're doing, you might interview someone who could talk about it. And then instead of just showing them on screen talking for a couple minutes, you overlay clips of doing things. It might be a clip of your facility wherever you're located. It might be a clip of, young people doing something cool, whatever it is. And it doesn't have to be a literal representation of what they're talking about. Um, it could just be people having fun, people laughing, people smiling, just whatever kind of emotions you're hoping to evoke, get it on there, and overlay it. And I'm going to show a short video here. This is one my coworkers made. This is part of our series on science. We have a whole collection of videos called Meet the Lab, which is STEM and science based, but it's mostly through profiles of people who work in scientific fields. So I'm just going to show part of this, but while you're watching it, it's like 2 minutes. While you're watching it, think about the A-roll and the B-roll. It starts out with lots of B-roll, and then it jumps into the A-roll. So kind of watch it through that lens.
When COVID hit, I felt like I was coming home to expose my family almost every day because I never knew what's a true exposure, right? Was it on surfaces? Was it in the air, right? So I almost treated it as it's bound to happen today. It's bound to happen today. It's bound to happen today. My name is Adam Perez. I've been a firefighter and a fire medic for the city of Madison for roughly 9 years. And I'm from the city of Madison, so it's actually really nice to represent the community that I grew up in and, helping people along the way. A lot of the time, people tend to think that firefighters are like these big.
Okay, so as you're watching that, you see that's a lot of B-roll. That's 1 minute and 13 seconds before they even got to the A-roll. So what you see right here where I paused it with his name on the screen, that's called the lower third. That's the first instance of A-roll. But you heard the audio from his interview. So they took the audio from the A-roll and they overlaid it over the B-roll. And this makes a really good point of if you're getting B-roll, and whether that's actual footage you film or photos, which also count as visuals, always get more than you think. If you're doing a 5-minute video, you're gonna want 50 things. It could be images, it could be short clips. If you're doing a B-roll clip, get at least 10 seconds. You're gonna want that much because you don't want anything to linger on the screen for too long. Show it you'll notice each clip is a few seconds long and then it moves to something else. So it shows him, driving the truck out of the driveway. That's a few seconds. And then it has a shot of him like from the inside of him driving for a few seconds. And then it shows him coming home. Like all these things, they're very, very short. But that's sort of, a professional would want that much, for your purposes, don't hold yourself to the same standard. But you do want more than you think. Always get more than you think. And you can get photos, you can get stock photos, film clips yourself, get all of it, get as much as you can. You'll be glad you did when you get to post-production. So a fun activity to do before you even start your video, if you want, have students film B-roll related to something that's not the video project. I know English teachers who have students film B-roll based on books they're reading. Like take the topic, and again, it doesn't have to be literal. Take the theme, like, what is the theme of the book? Could be anything. Like you could even give them a feeling like excitement. Okay, what does excitement look like? Now, yeah, you could film someone like jumping up and down and being excited about something. That's literal B-roll, but think about representational B-roll. Um, what does that look like? And this is where it gets a little creative, and it takes some time, and it takes a change in mindset to get that done. Or first day of school, and this is where you really think granular. Uh, First day of school, it's like, okay, we're usually in a school when we're doing this, so it's easy to have a school themed topic. Is it just people like walking into school? It's like, okay, that's one clip. You got 5 seconds right there, walking into school. What else? Is it that someone opening a locker? Okay, but is it just a medium shot of them opening the locker, or are you gonna do a close-up of their feet walking to the locker, and then a medium shot of them grabbing or doing the lock, and then a over the shoulder shot of them opening it, and then a close-up of what's in the locker? That's called a sequence, which I'll talk about in a second. But really, get them to think creatively about filming things, and this is where students really have a lot of fun. I have them do this in the classroom. Sometimes we get permission to have them like wander throughout the school doing this stuff. And they just do it on their phones, super basic. Like we don't even have them give us the footage. It's just for fun, practice. They get really into it. And it's really fun, and it's a good practice before jumping into a bigger video project. Okay. Let's talk about interviewing. So you don't have to do interviews, like I said, but you, I think you should consider it, because it's a good way to give structure to your video. So whether that's someone who's speaking from a personal perspective, they're telling their story, or maybe they're an expert and they're talking about something. Maybe they're a community member, maybe they're a community leader of some kind. Um, and generally people like being interviewed. They'll go on and on about how they're nervous about it, but it's really flattering to be asked to be interviewed. So don't be afraid to like reach out to people, just like contact random people. Or you see like a local news article about someone doing something cool, like contact them, ask to be interviewed. They'll probably do it, especially if it's for young people. People like to be interviewed. Um, so it's pretty accessible. And people are interesting. Everyone's interesting. People articulate it different ways, and some people are better on camera than others, but everyone has an interesting story to tell. Okay, just a few quick tips. Generally have them look at the interviewer. So one of the best things to do is set up your camera and then have the person asking the questions sitting next to it, and then remind them, say, look at me, don't look at the camera. And that way, when you look at the footage, they're not looking directly. Like right now, I'm looking directly at the camera. That's not as good as looking off to the side. It just looks better. Unless it is like a direct testimonial, you can do full on like eye contact with the camera. Sometimes that works. So it's kind of a creative decision. But it makes it a little more interesting if they're looking slightly off to the side, especially if they're on camera for more than a short clip. It gets weird, making eye contact that long. Writing interview questions is really an art form, and conducting an interview is a real skill. But it's a really valuable skill for students to practice. Writing open-ended questions versus closed-ended questions, asking follow-up questions, making it conversational, making the interview subject comfortable. These are all just great communication skills for young people to learn. And I have a slide here about, this is about open-ended questions. So, obviously you don't just want yes or no questions. Um, you know, the example we always use is you wouldn't ask somebody, do you like pizza? And they say yes. Like, what are you gonna do with that in your video? You have a clip, you have a 1 second clip of somebody saying the word yes. Like, what does that do for you? Because you generally don't include the questions. Sometimes you do in like a news format, but generally you cut out the questions and you just use their answers. So you might ask them, describe your favorite pizza place. And then they start to describe it. And then you say, why do you like it? Tell a story about and then eventually you kind of get more and more information. So you have to get them to tell a story. So sometimes they're not even questions. It's describe this. How did you feel when this happened? Why do you like this? Things like that. And this sounds easier than it is. Like you can always say, don't ask yes or no questions. And then almost guaranteed they're going to do it anyway, just because in the first draft. So that's why you spend a lot of time writing and rewriting these questions. And then the tricky thing is you spend a lot of time writing these questions. When you sit down and do it, don't be committed to these questions. You want to make it a conversation. So be willing to skip around, be willing to ask follow-up questions on the fly, which again is a real skill that has to be developed. It's not easy to be a good interviewer. So yeah, try to get emotional responses, no matter what you're talking about. It doesn't have to be somebody telling a really serious story about something they did, even if it is something more promotional. Try to convey excitement. They're not, a lot of times people come in ready to convey all this information. Like they have their talking points. Like, this is the information I want to convey. It's like, okay, but is this an exciting thing? Talk about how exciting it is. Try to get some emotion out of there. And don't be afraid to repeat questions. This is a classic interviewer thing where you ask a question towards the beginning, you don't get a good answer, and then you go to your other questions, and then at the end you kind of slightly rephrase the question, ask it again, and then maybe you'll get a good answer that time. Try to get them to restate the question in their answer. So if you ask them why the sky is blue, try to get them to say the sky is blue because, and then give the answer. Because otherwise you have clips of people describing things out of context, and then it's harder to put that into a video. Always ask for clarification, always ask for follow-up questions, repeat questions. Don't be in a hurry. If your interview is really short and it ends quickly, that's not good. You're gonna have a hard time later on when you're putting things together. So try to get them to talk a lot. And this is something you can kind of figure out a little bit in advance. So a lot of times you can do a pre-interview where if you identify a person you want to talk to, you just talk to them quickly on the phone. You don't ask them all the questions, but you kind of get a sense of, are they going to say a lot? Do they have a lot to say? Are they more gregarious? Is it harder to get information from them? And maybe they're just not the right person, or maybe they're the right person on paper, but, they just don't have a lot to say, or they're reluctant to say it. Then maybe find someone else. But, for your purposes, I think you could find someone who can speak to what you want to do. Okay, so this is a shot list. This is actually kind of going back to pre-production a little bit, but now that you have this background about A-roll and B-roll and interviews, you should really put together a shot list. And this one is more comprehensive than what you would need, but have a plan. This all this B-roll stuff can get really creative, and it is fun to just kind of wander around and be like, hey, what about that? Let's try it. But you want to have at least a list of the minimum you want to get. So, here there's script references, so you can skip the first couple columns, interior, exterior, and then you see in the fourth column where it says shot, that's describing how wide it is. So WS is wide shot. VWS is very wide shot. MCU is medium close up. And those things have different meanings, but you don't have to know exactly the difference between a close up or a medium close up, because it's kind of subjective. But basically, you want a variety. Um, don't always do a wide shot. You get really close up and then go wide and then kind of in the middle and just mix it up. It makes it more visually interesting. Okay, so a few more B-roll tips. I mentioned some of these. Keep it steady. Make sure each clip is at least 10 seconds. And I've learned if you tell a student to get every clip 10 seconds, they'll count to 10, and then the clip will be 7 seconds long. So tell them to get more. Maybe tell them 15 seconds actually, and then you'll end up with 10. Get more than you think. Debrief, so talk about it, watch it. If you do like a practice one, watch it, kind of say, hey, what would you do differently? And you don't have to be an expert to do this, just, hey, that looks good, but you panned over this. Like I had students who panned over a banner in their school, and then they clearly stopped recording too early. They didn't get to the end. It's like, no, it would have been nice to have a couple seconds at the end, just to make it look more smooth. So things like that. So in this picture, this is something I did in a school a couple of years ago, where they were doing a kind of a journalistic video about an art show that their school was putting on. So they interviewed this girl on the left who's an artist whose painting is going to be in the school art show. So they interviewed her, and then they went over to the art room and got some B-roll of her actually painting. So you can see the student on the right is doing a close-up of her hands with the brush dipping into the paint, and then they did a close-up of her painting on the canvas, and then a medium shot of her and the canvas, probably a wide shot of her in the classroom to kind of give a sense of geography of where she is, maybe a close-up of her face as she's painting like this, and then put all those things together and then put them into the interview clips. Pretty straightforward, and pretty easy to do, and turns out really well. Okay, so I mentioned sequence earlier. This is a way to really, really make your B-roll look good. Come up with a sequence. So don't think about individual shots, think about a sequence. So a sequence is just a collection of shots related to the same thing. So that's actually what I just described, this girl painting. So there's shots of her hands holding the paintbrush, there's close-ups of the canvas, her in the art room. All these things together make a sequence. So in this example on the right, you have someone who is, I think, a pastry chef. So it's a close-up of their hands kneading dough. And restaurants are like the best place to do B-roll. Whenever you learn about B-roll, they always use restaurants as an example because there's like so much action going on and people moving their hands. So you get close-up of their hands, close-up of their face, which is a good complement to a close-up of their hands. So you show one and then the other, and then a wide shot to show, okay, here's where they are, here's what they're doing. And then over the shoulder is another classic one. And then something interesting. Like this is where you get really creative. And this is where you notice when you see people filming B-roll, it looks really funny because they're always like climbing on tables and stuff. They're like hanging from the ceiling, trying to get that perfect shot. Like I've seen people hang out car windows while they're driving, like trying to get that perfect shot. So be creative, have fun with it. And it's fun to do this, with a group of young people where it's like, all right, you can stand on that table. How are you going to get something really interesting and unique? And maybe it doesn't turn out. That's fine, but it's really fun and it keeps their attention. Um, yeah, and then always do a variety of wide, medium, close up. Yeah, basically have fun with it. Okay, post production. So after you've done your filming, at this point, sometimes, people are kind of burned out. the fun part's over. Now we have to sit down and revise it. Um, but this really depends on the type of project you're doing. Like, is this something where there's a lot of editing involved? Whatever you do, it's good to get feedback. Always make time for revisions. Uh, if you want to go back and get more B-roll, because chances are you found out you don't have enough, or even if you want to spend time looking online for some images to pop in there, um, there's places to get copyright-free images if you want like stock photos. I use a lot of photos from unsplash.com, which is a website with non-copyrighted photos. Um, or whatever software you're using. Like if you're editing a Wii video, which is probably the most popular choice, they have their own stock footage and stock photos that are copyright free and free to use. Or even if you're doing something in Canva, like they always have an image library. Um, but this is a way to kind of structure all this. So if you have done an interview, um, or even if you just wrote a script, um, get a transcript, which I think there's free versions of this now. We used to subscribe to a service that would make a transcript for you, but with AI, like anyone can do it. So you get that transcript. First thing you do is go through it. So if you did an interview, first thing you do is go through it. You find the best stuff. Find that clip that you really like, the best thing, and then highlight it. You could do this in a Google Doc, or you could print it and do it with a highlighter, which is actually pretty fun. Um, and then figure out your beginning, middle, and end. It doesn't have to be in chronological order. Cut it up, mix it around, whatever you need to do. You can use different color highlighters for different themes, different topics, if it's a little more in depth. Basically put it into order. It's called a paper edit. Like the classic version of doing it is to print it and then cut out sentences and then physically move them around. Now it's usually like a Google Doc and people just cut and paste. And then you take those interview clips and then you write your voiceover, if you haven't done that yet. And you put all that together into a script. And writing a script can be really intimidating, but I'm going to show you an example. I talked about that. Actually, I will show you an example in a minute. This is a quick activity where you film a sequence without editing. It's called the in-camera edit, which just means there is no editing. You film it in order. So you decide what it is. You start with your beginning, middle, end. You do a mix of close and wide shots. And here is an example. So that's 3 close-ups in a row, part of their sequence. Wide shot.
Quidditch is a combination of kickball, dodgeball, and basketball, and it was started by a bunch of Harry Potter nerds at a college in Vermont about 10 years ago. Now it has become an international sport where teams from all over the US and other countries play championships every year. My name is Adeline Baxter, and I started playing Quidditch because I loved Harry Potter, and after the books and the movies were done, I wanted to continue loving that and having a part of it. But I think me and my friends continued playing really because we just loved the sport.
Okay, so that's a quick video. It's, just over a minute long. It's somebody talking about something, talking about a skill or an activity that they like. It's a variety of close-up, medium, wide shots, and there's no editing involved. They filmed these in order on a phone, and that's it. It's very straightforward. And I like to show things like this because I think this really demonstrates how accessible this stuff is. Anyone can do this with a little bit of planning. You can tell they planned it. They did a really good job with the pre-production. They had it all planned out, and then they filmed it. So pretty straightforward. And I know I'm gonna run out of time, so I'm gonna talk a little quickly, but I'm getting close to the end. So this is a good way to organize your script. So it doesn't have to look like a movie script. I like the AV script where you have two columns, audio and video. What is your audio? What is on the screen? So you could have, this is where you cut and paste your interview clips, your voiceover narration, you put it into that one column on the left, and then on the right, you say, okay, this B-roll clip, this interview clip, this photo, and then put it into the second column. And then you should organize in two columns. This is how we organize scripts with high school students, and it works really well. If you look at like a movie script, it's really intimidating. This is just a straightforward way to really help visualize what a script could look like. Okay, I'm not going to talk a lot about editing. I don't know what all of you have available or what you're thinking. You can do things directly in your social media app, depending on how you're going to share it. WeVideo is really accessible in the education world. They have a free version that's very limited, but it's not terribly expensive to pay if you're really into this and want to do it. They do a really good job of having like, a teacher or a supervisor, whoever it is, have the administrative position and then seats for students. So you can have like oversight and collaboration. They make it pretty easy. And then, like we use Adobe Premiere, which is like professional level stuff where there's more of a learning curve. So that's a little harder. And okay, this is a more complete video. So it's a little more polished. And I'll basically wrap up with this. And I might not show the whole thing. I don't remember how long it is, but all the principles we've talked about, pre-production, the interview tips, the B-roll, all this can come together into a video like this.
Choni egi kere jusupka egi hingaire wakanja hiki
B-roll.
karachija waunangshana. Mission Aja Hawawaji. My name's Eli Young Thunder.
Interview.
I am a teacher here in Black River Falls High School, and I have some great students and great colleagues. I also have a beautiful wife, 3 boys, and a wonderful dog.
So First Nations is kind of a newer class in your journey of teaching, correct? Yes. So what inspired you to start teaching that class specifically?
I'll be honest, when I heard that, I thought, oh, that's easy. But the more I thought about it,
okay, so you can kind of get a sense of this. So this is pretty accessible. They're doing an interview. They're interviewing a teacher in their school. So it's someone they already know. They know his story. They know his background. So far, most of the B-roll is the hallway at the school with the images related to First Nations, what he's talking about. And then, of course, if you're interviewing someone, it's great to B-roll of them at work. So it's always them on a computer, close up with their hands typing as they're pretending to work when you're filming them. And you can put it all together. Gonna start that again. Okay. I won't show this one because we don't have time, but video diary. This is more where you set up a phone facing yourself and then you just talk about something like what I talked about at the beginning. Just a good way to practice and get comfortable on camera. Okay. Do not buy equipment just for the sake of buying stuff. I know most people I talk to don't have a huge budget, but once in a while they're able to buy something. My advice is just do this on your phone first. And then as you get more into it, if you get more experience and you want to keep doing it, think about, okay, what problem am I solving? And what can I buy to solve that problem? Don't go out and buy a bunch of stuff. Think about your workflow. Do you have batteries? How are you saving your footage? Are you uploading it somewhere? Is this like a cloud-based thing? Do you have a Google Drive or something like that? Just think through that stuff, because that's stuff that you might not think of right away. Okay. So just to wrap up, with a few minutes left, start simple. You can do a really simple video really easily. Pre-planning is so important. Pre-production, plan it out in advance. Think about your workflow, try to think through those details as much as you can, and try it. Just dive in and try it. So, you can follow us, PBS Wisconsin, and that's my email address, if you have more questions. And I think we have a couple minutes right now. I understand Jen has a survey.
I do. I want to give just a moment. Does anybody have any questions about anything in particular? It was kind of funny, Nick, when you mentioned, there's a lot of B-roll in kitchens because there's so much going on. I thought, boy, that's an after-school program. there's a lot happening, right? You could really
Yeah.
get close-ups of kids engaged in games or activities or wide shots of kids outside. And then kind of putting those pieces together and then having a voiceover talking about the benefits and value of your
Yeah.
program or recruiting kids and families to join in the fun or, I mean, there's
Yeah.
just a lot of
I should
possibilities.
I should say when you're filming people, especially kids, we have release forms that we have their parents sign. So depending on your organization, whoever your supervisor is, check with them if you're allowed to film people. Generally in
Yeah,
public
that's a good
places, you're
point.
allowed to, but we always have signed release forms, especially if they're underage. We have a parent sign them. So just something to think about.
Yeah, that's a good point to mention. Does anybody have any questions, comments, thoughts?
Really awesome stuff, Nick. I feel like I'm just like buzzing with ideas right now. Love all the different ways that it can be connected to different core concepts and different, content areas. I feel like I came here kind of thinking about like, how can adults use this as not just work for the kids to do, but also like as a means to share the good work that they are doing in their programs? And the answer is give it to the kids. Child labor is the way. They can have the fun and they can demonstrate the fun to the adults as well. Just
Yeah.
really cool stuff. Lots of really neat ideas.
Yeah. And it's so cool to be able to tell people that the kids made this. Even if it took a lot of help, if you helped them out, just saying kids made this, like that makes it so much more special.
All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, and we'll be here if you do have any, I am going to launch that poll quickly. If you would take just a moment to answer our couple questions, we appreciate it. And this again will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel so that you will be able to go back and view it. If there are parts that you don't remember exactly what was talked about, it will be a resource and a reference for you. So thanks for joining us today, Nick. We appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Have a good day, everybody.